Hey, sixth grade, happy Friday. Today we are moving on from Frog and Toad into a poem, and I'm actually going to read it to you. So you can check that off your list. You just have to go back and review it. You do not have to do reading today. But before I do, I had a question. I would love to know, and you can email me maybe to check in. If I haven't heard from you yet, I would love to hear from you. It's been fun. Those of you who have sent me an email. So my email is lsmallwood@mylegacyschool.com. And what I would love to hear from you is, where did you see situational irony in the story The Open Road? So that could be something that you saw in your Worktext book. You had to fill in some examples, or maybe you found your own as you were reading. But I wonder if you noticed any, and if maybe from that TED video, if you had a chance to watch that, and the link is available on the Google Drive. What do you now know or understand better about situational irony, and how did you see it? So let's talk. I'd love to hear from you. It's not required, but it would be great if you have time and want to send one my way. Today we're going to read a poem called The Sparrow Hawk. And one of the things you kind of need to know before we read this poem, two things. The first is that a sparrow hawk is, as you might guess, a certain kind of a hawk. It's a bird of prey, but it's not huge. So a lot of times when a hawk, you think of the really big kind that we have in California, but it's only about the size of a blue jay. And it often lives even close to cities, and it feeds on small animals. So that's the first thing you want to know. What is a sparrowhawk? The second thing you want to know is that this poem is using a very specific metaphor to make its point. And the metaphor involves this word that, or phrase that you might not have heard of before, which is highwaymen. So in the 17 and 1800s, people often traveled by stagecoach. You might have seen that like on the side of a Wells Fargo building. But stagecoaches were often held up by highwaymen, who were masked bandits, men on horses who would hold up the passengers. They usually carried pistols, and they would threaten people in order to steal all their stuff, and then they would, go off down the highway. So today we're going to read in this poem, and when they talk about highwaymen, I want you to understand what is the comparison that's being made, and why did the author choose this comparison to think about a bird. If you want to look at it as I read it to you, I'm in your reading book on page 474. The Sparrowhawk by Russell Hoban. Wings like pistols flashing at his sides, massed above the meadow runway rides, galloping, galloping with an easy rein. Below the field mouse, where the shadow glides, holds fast the small purse of his life and hides. I'd love for you to go back, read that again. Now that you've heard it once, remember, I always think you need to hear a poem 3 times, because the first time you're just sort of making sense of it. The second time you can begin to notice patterns, and then the third time you can really make meaning. So as you read it, particularly think about this question: what comparisons are being made, and are those effective comparisons? Because a lot of what's happening in this particular poem is that the author is calling your attention to one thing by talking about something else. So again, either if you have ideas about situational irony from the last story, or about comparisons in this poem, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me a line, or you could just tell me how you're doing. It would be fun to know how your week has been at home. The other things you get to do today, which I also think are, this one is really fun in the work text. It's called artful alliteration. Alliteration is when you write and there are 2 words or more words that have the same first letter. Like if I was going to do that for some of you guys, it might be zany, Zane, or Let's see, happy, Hannah, and helpful, Harmon. So anyways, they give you an opportunity here to make whole sentences using alliteration. So you have to think of verbs and adjectives and phrases that all start with the same letter. So I'd love to see what you come up with. And then finally, your last assignment for today is about adverbs. So in the same way that we've been talking about adjectives, adjectives are modifiers, right? Adjectives are words that modify a noun, a person, place, or thing. They expand it, they explain it, they make it bigger. Adverbs do that for verbs. So today, as you look at your lesson, you're going to want to think about what verb is the adverb modifying, and where do we find the adverb in a sentence. So I thought really quickly we could do the first couple together so you'd have a head start. I'm on page 239 in your writing and grammar book. I'll give you just a second to open that up. And on those first guided practice questions, they're having you not only look for the adverb, but you're doing two other things. We're going to find the adverb, then we're going to find the verb that the adverb is modifying, that it's changing, that it's explaining, that it's making better. And then we're going to figure out if that adverb is telling us information about how, when, or where. So let's look at number one. The sentence says, we often look for butterflies in this field. On page 239, number one, we often look for butterflies in this field. So the first thing I would do if I was approaching a problem like this, the easiest thing, I think, is to look for the verb, the action. So what is the action in this sentence? Well, the action is look, because that's the thing that somebody's doing. They're not oftening, they're not butterflying, they're looking. So I underline look because that's the verb. And then I think which word is explaining or expanding on the verb look. And the word that explains look in this sentence is often. So I'm going to circle that because that's my adverb. We often look. Often is telling us what? Well, that's the next question. Is it a how they look, when they look, or where? And I would say often is an adverb that tells us about when. It tells us about the number of times it happens. So in this sentence, you would have underlined look, circled often, and then the answer in the blank right before number one is when. Question number two, the sentence reads, in the autumn, clouds of monarchs fly south. So as I read that sentence, again, the first thing I would always do is look for the verb. I want to know what the action is. And so clouds is not an action, monarchs, autumn, but fly. Fly seems to be the action. In this sentence, the thing that's happening is flying. So I'm going to underline fly because that's my verb. And then I want to know what is the adverb, what describes fly. Now you might be tempted to think it's monarchs because monarchs comes right before fly. But actually in this case, the word that's describing fly isn't monarchs. That's part of the noun. The word that describes fly is south. And that's an adverb, south, that's telling us where. It's telling us where they fly. As you look down, they're going to have you on questions 4, 5, and 6 talk about whether the adverb in this sentence can be made into a comparative adverb, which means something like more or most, or if it can be made into a superlative adverb. So that's like number 4, if you have hard to start with, then the superlative forms of hard would be harder, hardest, or if you had good, which is not here, but if you had good, it would be good, better, best. Those are the superlative forms. And they give you those examples in that blue box up there. So if you have a question, that's a great place for you to go look. And then on the bottom here, they're going to ask you to fill in sentences, and there's a number of ways that you could choose to do that. If you have any questions as you're going, if this doesn't make sense to you, You do have a couple of resources. So number one, I do have in the Google folder the answer key for this, so you or your parents could look at that. Number two, you can definitely email me. I am on email every day. If you want to take a picture of your work and send it to me, I'm happy to look it over and send it back to you. So I could look at that and we could talk about it. If you're like, Miss Smallwood, this doesn't make sense and my mom doesn't know how to talk to me about it, then let's talk. I would love to. I'm here and I want to make sure that you have everything you need to do your best during this learning at home time. Hope you guys are hanging in there. We're praying for you. Talk to you soon.